Thank you very much, Bruce. Actually, there are 7 or 8 seats up here. Why don't some of you in the back come forward so it's less crowded at the back? I won't give the really fiery sermon, so you needn't worry about sitting in the front pew.
And you can leave anyhow if you have to.
Yeah, we won't. I would argue with regard to lessons not learned that in some important respects, what happened in Iraq, the imbroglio, the fiasco, the quagmire, whatever words you want to apply to it, which won't be applied to it by our neighbor down here about 3 blocks, who's now no longer in office, it is the revenge of the social historians. And what I mean by that is that since the 1960s, historians have spent an awful lot of time trying to understand what decolonization was, what made it go, how it worked. And surprisingly enough, very smart people at the top of the U.S. government, some of whom were deans at Johns Hopkins and so forth, don't appear to have read those books. And I think that what really happened in Iraq was an attempt to recolonize, and was doomed to fail because the whole attempt didn't understand what decolonization had been in the first place. The plan of the neoconservative faction that promoted the invasion of Iraq was to go in, clip off the leadership of the Ba'ath Party, insert a new leadership, reorient Iraq as a satellite of the United States, and very quickly draw down most troops, leave perhaps a division. You know, the United States had 3 divisions in Germany, but then the Cold War ended, and there was not a good reason, aside from supporting some local German economies, to keep those 3 divisions in Germany. And the idea was to bring 2 of them back to the United States and to put 1 of them in Iraq. So you would keep about 20,000 men in Iraq, and you would simply install Ahmed Chalabi, the corrupt financier who was convicted of embezzling $300 million from his own bank, to run an oil company. And Chalabi in turn would make policy that was favorable to U.S. big oil, to the U.S. government, and would recognize Israel. Doug Beith told a friend of mine in the State Department that it was very simple. You think about Iraq as a computer. You think about Saddam as the processing chip. You take out the Saddam processing chip and you put in the Chalabi processing chip, and everything will be over with in 6 weeks. To which my friend replied, "Doug, you're smoking crack." But why did Beith believe that it would be possible to simply impose a new leadership on Iraq? It's because he didn't understand social history. He did not understand the history of the mobilization of the masses. And to be fair, Saddam Hussein and his regime had figured this out, and they had an answer for it. Because the history of Iraq in the 1950s, 60s, 70s was a history of popular mobilization against British imperialism. The British had conquered what is now Iraq during World War I. They had set up a monarchy led by the Hashemite family, to whom the British owed favors because, as you all know, the British double-booked Syria during World War I. The French, you know, like it's when you double book an airplane, sometimes some passengers just rush on and occupy the seat. So the French rushed into the United States and occupied it and kicked the Hashemites out. So the British had a country without a king, king without a country, and so they brought in Faisal and imposed him on Iraq. And it more or less worked because at the time that the British did this, the Iraqis were mostly not very mobilized. But mobilized, I just mean the Karl Deutsch, Chuck Tilley phenomena, that the Iraqis were largely peasants, they were largely illiterate, they weren't very connected, they weren't very organized, they weren't involved in mass media, they didn't have political parties and so forth. Iraq for the rest of the 20th century was that all those things did happen. They became more urbanized, they got petroleum, the education spread, they formed political parties, so you get a very substantial communist party in Iraq in the 1950s and 60s. Hanabatatu thought that if you count fellow travelers and the people who would come to meetings and come to demonstrations, you maybe had 500,000, and it wasn't that large a country. So this is very significant. The communists were able to get out a demonstration of 100,000 people in 1959 against the Qasem military government at that time, which had been refusing to allow communists into the cabinet. You had the rise of the Ba'ath Party, secular Arab nationalist party, very attractive to first-generation intellectuals, whether Shiite or Sunni, revolutionary, somewhat Stalinist in its orientation, but a mass incorporating party. And then you had the Dawah Party among the Shiites, which was the first major political vehicle of political Islam, which envisaged an Islamic state that would involve some sort of parliamentary mechanisms and the imposition of Islamic law and so forth. This was way before Khomeini went in for this sort of thing. So the Iraqis were becoming socially and politically mobilized in a big way, and then the Ba'ath coup of 1968 established this one-party state, which worked by reducing the communists to junior partners or destroying the ones who wouldn't play ball, and by keeping a lid on the Dawah Party among the Shiites. And that compromise came undone during the 1980s because of the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War. And the Kurdish population in the north of Iraq decided to make a play for independence or greater autonomy, and they started playing footsie with the Iranians, who were at war with Iraq, and so they were basically acting as traitors from the Baghdad point of view. And then a lot of the Shiites in the south had sympathies with Iran and so forth. And the Saddam Hussein regime really felt that with the prospect of an Iranian invasion, with the disloyalty of the Kurds and the Shiites, because it was a very strongly Sunni Arab-based regime, that it was in danger of falling, that what would happen to the Shah might happen to the leadership of the Ba'ath Party, and they responded by gassing people and using mass government terror. So they killed maybe 5,000 people at Halabja, this Kurdish city in the north, and that was only one of a large number of gas attacks in the north. There were also gas attacks in the south. In the wake of the Gulf War in 1991, there was a massive nationwide uprising against the Ba'ath. It was organized by the political Shiites from Iran, and it threw off the Ba'ath Party rule in 16 of 18 provinces. The Ba'ath Party reasserted itself with helicopter gunships and tanks, attacking civilian crowds, and also by sometimes gassing them. So the Ba'ath regime was very ramshackle, very weak, and managed to stay in power only because it promised, it threatened actually to gas people. That was, the Kurds and the Shiites were relatively silent to the extent that they were still under Ba'ath rule because of that extreme fear. So one of the things that was wrong with Fais's theory was that it was a little unlikely that Ahmad Chalabi was going to gas people